Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my wrap-up of the things I finished reading in the past 2 weeks. I don't have a very long time to film this morning because I have things I need to go do, so I'm going to try to whiz through all this stuff pretty quickly. I think I've got 10 things to talk about, so let's get started. First up, I did finally finish reading Interference by Sue Burke. It took me about 2 months to read this, and I loved it. Why did it take me so long to read it? I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't have much coherent to say about it. I read it in such a disjointed way. I don't think I really grasped everything that this book was doing and like the theme of it. I enjoyed it because it's well written and it's interesting and it does a lot of things with like aliens and communication that I love. I don't think I completely understood it though. But Interference is the follow-up to Semiosis, and basically Earth sends a mission to Pax to check up on the Pax colonists, and the Earthlings encountering the pacifists, both the human pacifists and the glassmakers, let's just say they don't immediately get along. And they don't understand each other. There are a lot of misunderstandings, miscommunications, and the main impression I took away from this book, especially by the way that it ended, is that all of these different factions, all these different peoples and cultures and species, they think that they have understood what the other is and what the other wants, but they have fatally misunderstood something important. And everyone has deluded themselves into thinking that they are the ones in charge or that they are the ones that have solved what they think the problem was and that they have made things safe for themselves in the future. And they're all wrong. They are all wrong. I loved this because it did really deal with communication, and as you might tell from the title, interference, miscommunication, something getting in the way. There are barriers to understanding each other, both, the language barrier, but also cultural barriers, even gender barriers in some case, the species divide, and people being blinded by this and their prejudices and their biases and such. And it's such a great concept for a book. I loved it. And yes, I will have to reread this duology at some point. I really love Sue Burke's science fiction and I can't wait for what she does next. Then after that, I finished reading Locked Rooms by Laurie R. King. This is the 8th book in the Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes series, which is a mystery series. And with 8 books in, I can't talk too much about the plot, especially because Locked Rooms is kind of the culmination of a bunch of clues building up to what is going on with Mary and what happened to her family. And in Locked Rooms, she finally comes back to her childhood home in San Francisco with the intention basically of selling off all of her assets there and leaving America and just never going back to the childhood memories basically. But when she is there, something is not right. She doesn't remember everything that she should, or she is intentionally blocking remembering something. It is more of a psychological, emotional story. There isn't as much action in it. And interestingly, it does actually break away from Mary's first-person narration. We finally get a third-person POV that follows Holmes on his own, with an interesting cameo from Dashiell Hammett actually. And as much as I might have complained in the past that Mary isn't always treated as an equal to Holmes, despite being as, brilliant and deductive as him, she's often just playing his assistant. But in this story, it is truly set up in a way that Mary is perhaps not the best person to see what is going on. Much of the trouble is in her own mind and in her own past, and Holmes can see it more clearly than she can, at least until the end. And so I really liked having that separate section following Holmes and being a little bit more inside of his head and seeing his side of their partnership. That was really good. So ultimately, I really enjoyed this because it wrapped up some loose ends and some things that I've been kind of wondering about from the previous couple of books, and makes me wonder what the next one will go on to now that Mary's past has been finally addressed. So I plan on jumping into the next book, which I think is The Language of Bees, pretty soon. I read Ingathering, The Complete People Stories by Zenna Henderson for the Classic SFF Readathon at the beginning of April. I really enjoyed this collection, especially the first half of the earliest people stories from the 1950s and 1960s. I have already filmed a video talking about this collection, so more thoughts on it will be coming soon. But overall, I really enjoyed it, and I really love the concept of the people and how heartwarming a lot of these stories were. Continuing with that kind of heartwarming theme, I also read volumes 5 and 6 of The Girl from the Other Side by Nagabe. This is a manga series about a little girl and kind of a monster, an outsider who's been cursed. And basically everyone wonders why the little girl isn't cursed herself, because she has touched or been touched by an outsider, and she still appears like a little girl rather than one of these black outsiders. These were good. I thought that volume 5 was kind of just treading the water, not going much further. And then I got to volume 6 and a couple of things happened in this one that moved the story along a little bit more, that clarified the mysteries a tiny bit more, and I really enjoyed it. I continue to really love the relationship between Shiva and Teacher. It's just such a cute relationship. The little girl with the very tall, strange looking person. But it is just adorable, and I really love the artwork in this. It's kind of scritchy, scratchy looking, and it's just a style that I really enjoy. I wouldn't say it's like super beautiful and detailed, but it really suits the feel of the story for me, I think. I really like it. I think there are 2 more volumes that are in English, and I will hopefully get them pretty soon. I feel like this is a story that I want to read quickly rather than drag it out for a long time, because it's already pretty slow paced. I don't want to forget things from previous volumes. I also read Heartstopper Volume 3 by Alice Oseman. This is her web comic. It's kind of a queer teen romance story, and it is about 2 teenage boys who fall for each other, and just they're kind of navigating coming out, being gay, being bisexual in high school in England, so it's not called high school. And also with this particular volume, we see the beginnings of Charlie's eating disorder, which is, I think, going to be a major part of the story. These characters are secondary characters in other books by Oseman, so I don't think it's a super spoiler that like they end up together and what happens to them later on. People who have read her other work already know how this ends up, I believe, but this is the full backstory. I'm not sure that I really want to read like the other novels by Oseman, but I found this webcomic to just be wonderful to read. I really been enjoying it, and surprised about that because I'm not necessarily into queer teen romance webcomics, but it's hitting the spot apparently. Next is Dead Voices by Katherine Arden. This is the sequel to Small Spaces, and this is middle grade horror. I liked Small Spaces. I found it quite scary actually, but it didn't wow me. I didn't think it was like super amazing. Dead Voices was better. Like, I think this was genuinely a better book, and it was way scarier than the first one. In this one, Ollie and her friends go with their parents to a new ski resort that has opened up. They get snowed in, nobody else makes it there, so they're the only people there with the owners of the ski resort. And it's haunted. It's absolutely haunted by some really scary ghosts. It was so scary that I couldn't read it on some days. Like, I had to stop reading at night and had to take some bits very slowly because I found it really scary. But I'm a total pushover. I find even like mildly suspenseful things are too much for me. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and I liked that we didn't just have Ollie's viewpoint in the story now. Much of it is actually told from Coco's viewpoint, and I like that. It's not all just about Ollie, and it's nice to see Ollie kind of called on some of her decisions and actions by her friends. I don't think that the third book has been announced in the series, but I definitely think there's going to be one, and I will read it. It'll probably be even scarier, but I will read it. Next up, I read a novella, The Test by Sylvain Nouvel. I listened to this on audiobook, as many people had recommended it as a really, really good performance, and I would agree with that. It was great to listen to, and I was really gripped by the story. Despite it being a good performance and a good production of this story, I have these doubts in my mind about whether this was done well and whether it was done accurately and sensitively. It is about a man taking the British citizenship test in the future when things are kind of different, and it basically explodes into a violent situation, and that is the test. And despite it being compelling, like I wanted to know what was going to happen, I don't know. This is very much an immigrant story and a story about people of color and their experience with immigration and citizenship tests, and how they are tested, how they are expected to fit into the country that they're trying to immigrate to and everything. And I don't know, I've had friends who have talked to me about this, and I'm starting to think more and more that the story itself is not actually that good or that well done, but it was packaged nicely. That may be the best thing I can say about it. Then I reread a story that made me very happy, Romancing the Werewolf by Gail Carriger. This is one of her novellas set in the Parasol verse, and it is the happily ever after for Biffy and Lyle, which is one of my favorite romantic pairings in this entire universe. I love this story. I waited many years for it, and when I reread it, it was even better. I had to round up my rating to 5 stars. It just made me so happy while I was reading it. And yeah, it's a really cute romantic story about Lyle coming back to be the beta for Biffy's werewolf pack in London, and it was really good. And the last book that I have to talk about very quickly is another romance novel, A Delicate Deception by Sebastian. I have this thing where occasionally I think, I really liked Hither Page by Sebastian. I should try one of her other novels. And then I pick something else up by her, and it turns out it's the third and final book in a series, and I don't understand a lot of the characters or the references because I didn't read the first 2 books. A Delicate Deception is the third and final book, I believe, in the Regency Imposters series, and no, I have not read the first 2 books. I picked it up purely because the description sounded relatively interesting. A young woman, a writer, goes off to seclude herself in the countryside because she has major social anxiety, basically, and she doesn't want to see anybody, but one day, while she's walking her usual path, she bumps into a very large man. He's an engineer, he builds railways, and despite initially not liking him for interrupting her walks because she does not want to encounter people, they start talking, they've got chemistry, and romance ensues. I really enjoyed this for basically the anachronistic, unconventional sentiments and arrangements for sex and marriage and relationships. I just really enjoyed the pretty blunt conversations about, well, the whole like virginity deflowering thing in this was actually really funny. But I don't know, I enjoyed a lot of the conversations and the discussion of mental health and working with people to help them with that and how they feel about themselves. The thing that I didn't really like about this is that I honestly didn't feel like the main characters had that much chemistry. I think you're supposed to feel that they have this build-up where they get to know each other and they have like, sexual attraction to each other. I just didn't really feel it. I liked when they were talking to each other, but the rest of it didn't really feel all that special to me. I also am kind of over the very big, gruff man who hates himself, which is exactly what Sydney is in this. It's not as bad or as strong as some other books I've read, and it is actually addressed. This whole like not liking yourself, not thinking you are worthy of your friends and family, and basically self-hate is addressed for more than one character in the story, which is good. But I think this is just a stereotype of male leads in romance novels that irritates me a little bit. Yeah, So overall, it was a very enjoyable read. I mean, I read the entire thing in one day, practically in one sitting. It was a lot of fun, but not my favorite thing ever. I might go back and read the first 2 books in the series though, because some of the references to previous events, or at least I hope previous events of other books, were kind of interesting. Anyway, that is the last book I have to talk about today. It was the last thing that I finished very late last night. I'm trying to work in more like fun comfort reads, and I think it's working. I enjoyed a lot of these and they made me feel better while I was reading them. So let me know if you have read any of these books, and if you want to talk about them, leave me a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back to talk to you again soon. And until then, bye.